Do you like conversation on a variety of topics? Feel like no one wants to talk about the things that interest you? Tired of only hearing the same political, sports, or catastrophe talk? Yeah, we feel that way too. Join two high-functioning geeks as they discuss just about anything under the sun. We can't tell you what we'll be talking about each week because we don't know where our brains will take us. It will be an interesting conversation though, so hang on and join us. Here comes the Relentless Geekery.
Okay. All right. Yeah, this is exciting. Let's see how he is our third, our fourth. Who have we had? It's very cool that we've made wonderful connections and that they're, hey, willing to talk to us like we laughed about.
Yeah,
there we go.
John.
Hey, John. Okay.
You got your mic off.
Let's see.
How's that?
There we go. That's
good.
better.
There we go. Okay.
Excellent. How's the look?
Looks fine.
I got that sort of shiny thing going on here.
That's true. You got a little bit of glare from the window, but it casts your face in a heroic.
It's sort of a noir kind of
there we
thing.
Go. Exactly.
Yeah. I suppose
Alan
I had a second light over
all the radiation from his monitor, and that's what makes him.
Yeah, it's going to turn me into some kind of a superhero or something.
Right, that's what we would hope.
Try these. Oh boy. Okay.
There we go. Exactly.
These are for like far away, and the screen it's like my eyes have reached a point where there's no sweet spot. You just have to like it.
Well, to nerd it up there, my glasses. So I had LASIK a couple years ago when I had cataract surgery, and so I can see far away. I can see things just fine, but up close, I can't see. So I asked them specifically my glasses to tune them for how far away I normally sit to the computer. So these glasses, I can't really read with them, but at the computer, it makes everything look perfect. So there's nerding it up.
I think I followed that. Yes. I just had an eye appointment in December. I had an appointment in December, and I'm in they told me early stage cataracts, which really sucks. I'll be 60 at the end of this year. And I'm going to need 8 months. I'm going to need the 8 months between now and December to just get my head around that concept. But yes. Yeah.
We've actually talked about that before. I don't have any diagnosis of cataracts yet, but I'm really not looking forward to it because I'm really flinchy. We're going to bring that in about things going near my eyes. I hate putting in eye drops. I hate like when I get puffed at when they're doing the
they don't do that anymore.
Test and stuff like that.
They're modern now, Alan. They don't do the puff. They have a device they actually stick on your eye and makes everything go watery, wavy.
I do have the new one, but even like that, the little thing moving into my field of vision and getting uncomfortably close. I know we always jump around in our discussions. There was a great books by Gene Wolfe, The Shadow of the Torturer books. Remember those? And one of the things they talked about how one of the most base human instincts is to protect your head. Like you react to stop an arrow, a sword, whatever might be coming at you before your thinking mind could do it. Right. And one of the ways in which somebody gets dispatched is he's got two heads, and he protects the one, but the other one gets killed, and that still kills him. So there's a science fiction fantasy reference that even that incredible base human thing of avoiding falling and keeping your temperature and protecting your head doesn't work if you're Zaphod Beeblebrox type where you've got two heads. Anyway.
Guys, I'm going to go shut my door, and hopefully my dog won't. Give me 1 second. I'll be right back.
Okay. Sure. Yeah, we're going to talk Pulp Fiction. Hey, we got 5 minutes left, so let's mention Pulp Fiction a bit. That's how it goes.
I actually did make some notes to try to get. I made notes as to good questions to ask and stuff. Here we go.
Don't ruin things now. Good questions. Oh man, John.
Have we started yet? What are we doing here?
We kind of roll, and then we figure out a good place where we started.
Okay.
John,
well, I wish I'd known that. Okay, all right.
You mentioned December. When's your birthday?
The 19th.
Oh, I'm the 16th.
And now the whole world knows.
Yeah.
Yes.
So.
Oh yeah. Oh no. Security breach. Okay.
Yeah. It's too late now. Yeah.
So we know you, John. But
had I known we were on the air, I would have said 28. But what are you gonna do?
There we go.
Yeah.
We know you, but for anyone listening, give them a brief. Who's this third voice on today?
Third voice, but only one head. Let's see. I'm a lot of things, actually. If we're talking about the Pulp Fiction, from a Pulp Fiction standpoint, I am the author of the Midnight Guardian series, which began in 2016 with a book called Hour of Darkness and continued in 2019 with Annihilation Machine. And the most recent installment, it was published in November of this past year, 2022, a book called God and Sinners. I am one half of a very small two-man, small press publishing venture called Flinch Books. My partner is Jim Beard in the Toledo area. I'm in beautiful Cleveland, Ohio, where it's about, 35 degrees in mid-April.
Right.
Just coming off of a couple days in the 70s. That's how we roll in Northeast Ohio.
Indian winter instead of Indian summer, kind of
Or
a
something
thing.
like that. Yeah. What else am I? I am the father of two, the husband of one. What else? What else can I tell you? I've been a professional writer for the better part of 40 years. First as a journalist, and more recently in marketing. That's my day job when I'm not hammering out stories. That's about the short version, unless there's something more you want to know that I haven't mentioned. But
that's sufficient.
That sounds great.
Ask away and I'll tell you everything, or
Exactly.
just about anything.
The reason that we were happy to have you on the show is because through separate paths, Steve and I both discovered you and your works, and we're very happy. I'm a longtime fan of pulp fiction. Even before the Quentin Tarantino movie, I had read so many Doc Savages and Shadows and G8s and Operator Fights and all of those things, back to Tarzan and the early science fiction, early horror and stuff like that. And I occasionally go to pulp cons or to pulp section of Comic Cons and so forth. And that's when I first discovered your work and loved it. I love small press, or independent press is maybe a better way to put that. And I really try to, my own little Medici. I love whatever money I've made from being a computer guy. I love making sure that it goes back to people, that this work deserves to be in the world.
It is always appreciated. I can tell you, I speak for a lot of small press publishers and independent authors. When someone says they try to support the indie author or the indie publisher, it's always appreciated.
There you go. So we've had a chance to talk a couple times after you had done a reading at a Lakewood bookstore, after I met you at a pulp con in Westlake, if I remember right. And and just that, each time, I think probably after your first book had come out, then I've tracked you. I always add people to my follow list or just become aware of them.
Stalk me.
Stalk you, exactly that. Well, it's fun to have just to find out that there's a human being behind these things. You know what I mean? Any number of authors, they really are to remove. And I've never been a stalker type guy, but when we had a chance to have a conversation and it was actually pleasant instead of, "You're getting a little close there, sir. How about if you back off?"
Stop breathing through your mouth. Yes.
Exactly.
Last time, as I recall, Ellen, last time you and I talked, it was at Loganberry Books near Shaker Square in Cleveland.
Yes.
And you were wearing a mask, as every responsible citizen does or should. And I didn't recognize you for the first couple minutes as you walked up to the table, when I was embarrassed about that. But yeah, that was last November, right on Thanksgiving, I think.
Yeah, right after the third book in the series came out. And in fact, as I recall, because Christmas was coming up, I had to get something for my good friend Stephen. And there I was going, I think Stephen would love these. And so I actually bought a couple and had you sign them for him. So it all is this wonderful, it all ties together.
Sure. So. Have you heard from Stephen? Is he still speaking to you? Is he yay, nay, thumbs up, thumbs down? Has he said anything?
I was super excited to get all three of them because I'm like, I know this guy. I've seen him before.
Especially when, obviously, Stephen and I have been doing this for a couple of years now and have a whole bunch of these in the can. And we knew we had many shared interests, but even amongst the world of, you name it, movies, comic books, etc., there's still more rarefied atmosphere, like whether you really like the older pulps. Some people, they start reading whatever was written since they were born. And in fact, that's one of my common, not a complaint, but it's an awareness of, there really are some people that they won't watch a black and white movie because somehow life didn't exist in color before they were born. Whereas I had that joy of finding out when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, you go back to read things from the 30s and 40s, and it really was a whole different world, and not now the world of cell phones and so forth, but I loved that the world was unexplored, that there was new technology that really was like jets were first around, ultraviolet light was first available. And the pulps really were some of those that wonderfully popularized and threw those wonders out into the world for other people to learn about. And that's so much what you have in your series is a return to those wonderful days. Union City is a great, not only sense of place, but a sense of time for those kinds of things.
Funny thing about Union City, I don't know, I was trying a couple different names for a sort of a fictional town that was part New York, a little bit Chicago, and a little bit Cleveland. And I didn't realize till after I published the first book that there is at least one or two actual Union cities. I think there's one in New Jersey and I think there's one out west somewhere. And had I known that, I might have gone in a different direction with a different name. No mayors have contacted me yet to file lawsuits, so I think I'm
Right.
safe. But yeah, no, I was looking for something that's like, every town USA, like Metropolis or Gotham. But
Exactly. It's like Springfield from The Simpsons. I think they called it that, the most common town name, and they figured everyone will know somebody from Springfield.
like Bedford Falls.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
But to your point about history, though, I'm right there with you. I have said many times to many people, including my own kids who are in their they'll soon be 22 and 20. But I try to impress upon them that the world did not start on the day they were born. And because it feels like I encounter so many people so often who they can't fathom that, there was a whole period of history that existed before I was born, and important things happened and important decisions were made and circumstances took place that sort of shaped where we are right now.
Exactly.
And it always surprises me that people don't really take stock in that and recognize that the world didn't just appear as we see it now. It's been a gradual evolution of a lot of different decisions and influences and decision makers and circumstances, and it all comes to a point of here and now. But there's a lot that went on decades ago, centuries ago, and beyond.
John, I got a question.
Yes.
Why, or do you have any favorite pulps from the past? Any heroes, any books?
Wow. The more I read pulps, and I don't read pulps exclusively, but the more I do read, the more I dig, the more I discover. I would say that the first for me, I don't know if I'd call, I wouldn't have, I'm not sure I'd call it a favorite, but the first for me was John Carter, the Edgar Rice Burroughs books. That was my doorway. I was reading those in my 20s. Let me think. No, I was reading Tarzan in my teens. I read a few of the Tarzan stories. I didn't read all of them. And then I started digging into John Carter in I want to say my late 20s. As far as favorite characters, gosh, I know Doc Savage is a go-to. A lot of people say that, but I have to say it's Doc Savage. It
really is for me too.
It's funny because Doc Savage keeps showing up to this day in popular culture in different iterations. I remember when the first Indiana Jones movie came out in, I think it was 1981, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
Yeah.
And my father, who grew up in the 1930s and 40s, he got one look at this guy and he said, hell, that's just Doc Savage with a hat and a hat. And at the time when he said that, 1981, I'm 17 years old. I barely knew who Doc Savage was. But then I'm going to say a decade, 15 years later, when I started reading Doc Savage, I realized, Dad was right. Certainly we see Doc Savage in Indiana Jones. We see him in a lot of comics. He's an idea that keeps popping up. And he was a distillation of a lot of ideas that predated him. But in the 40 plus years since, he keeps popping up in different iterations.
Exactly. The self-made man.
The
the self-made man, the superhuman man. You know what I mean? Right. We had a session recently, maybe even just last one or two ago, where we talked about that the appeal of it to me was how much Batman follows from him in terms of he really learned all the martial arts and all the science and tried to make it so that there was nothing in the world that would surprise him and that he could use all these tools and technologies for him. Surrounded himself with a band of assistants that also were specialists in various different places. And one of the cool things about the book is it's not just Doc wandering the world, it's the camaraderie of it. And like a group of friends do, they kind of like rank on each other and have their own little personal conflicts and personal achievements and stuff like that. And that was when you're a teenager, you're like, I want to be in a gang like that. I want to be the Goonies. I want to be another thing.
You definitely see Doc Savage in the Fantastic Four, I think, especially in the early days of the Fantastic Four, the Jack Kirby, Stan Lee era. I think you see him like in A-Team from television in the 1970s. So it's the idea of a team led by a really smart, really savvy guy. There's infighting and there's snark, but yet when push comes to shove, they get the job done. So
that's right. They would die for each other. It's not that they really hate each other. It's that little bit of kind of like I used to have a weekly poker game, a monthly poker game, and so much part of the game wasn't just playing cards. It was the little I play back and forth, the little insults. Boy, your money is warming my pocket from last week. That guy.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway.
There's are you guys familiar with James Rollins, the thriller author?
Yeah.
Yes.
He was in town several years ago and doing a book signing, and I can't remember which book it was. It's on a shelf over there that I can't see because it's Demon Crown. Demon Crown. Anyways, I had read before he did that. This is 2017, and before he came to town, I had read an interview that he did where when he was a kid, he read all the Doc Savage books, and I asked him about that during the presentation he did before the signing. He said, "Yeah, I read them all." And yes, they are a big influence on what I do. His whole Sigma series, I think it's called.
Yes.
And he even has a character named Monk in his books, which is a nod to Lester Dent.
Very cool.
This is a modern day thriller writer who's been a bestseller for the at least 20 years. He's been pretty much every book he publishes winds up on the bestseller list. Doc doesn't go away.
Alan, that needs to be
That's
your
right.
next talk. The influence of Pulp Fiction Doc Savage on modern literature and movies and everything.
That's right. It's also worth acknowledging, like when he says he read every one of them, I have too, but that's not like most people think, hey, I read a couple dozen books. There's 181. It's an amazing, maybe Perry Rodin outdoes him. I think there's hardly any series. And also, I think The Shadow has more, but I think it wasn't all Maxwell Grant, that is Walter Gibson. So that it's another cool thing that I don't know why this is, but I've always liked series fiction. And if you're looking to read something, it's sometimes great. I read the whole dozen books of this, but there's always the sadness when it's over. And Doc Savage was for years and years. Wow, they're getting republished. They're putting out the omnibus editions now. You know what I mean? I was like so happy to have a chance to get this, tap into this wonderful kind of fiction for a long time. It was very sad.
It's gonna take me a long time to get through all the Doc books if I ever do, because those are just one of many books I read in many genres. I'd say if I had to guess right now, I'd say I've read maybe 3 dozen, maybe 30 or 40 of them, but that's just a fraction of the output from the original series from Street and Smith. And of course, Will Murray's writing his stuff. I'm reading some of his, and he writes very much in the Lester Dent style.
Exactly.
But it will probably take me the rest of my life to read all the Doc stories.
That's right. Even back when I was reading them, I didn't read them serially. Haha. I always had a sprinkling of. I liked the Tarzan books, as you were saying. I read other, not just pulp things, but the more modern James Bonds. I read all kinds of men's adventure, the Destroyers and stuff like that. And so it was cool to compare and contrast between the more modern ones that were a lot more death, a lot more gritty, maybe more swearing, more sexual escapades, whereas Doc was pretty much a Boy Scout, quite noble, he hardly ever killed someone, but he let the villains get themselves in trouble. The Avenger was even more about that. Richard Henry Benson, almost all of his victories were not he plotted against the villain, he let the villain be hoisted on their own petard in various different ways. That was his particular thing.
To your question, Stephen, to your earlier question, another favorite, not necessarily character, but another favorite writer is Raymond Chandler, author of the Philip Marlowe books. Certainly, he was a favorite. I hesitate to even say this because it's almost embarrassing, but on more than one occasion, I'd say twice, 2 people who have read my books have said there's a little bit of Raymond Chandler in your writing, and I'll take it. It's almost embarrassing to say my own name in the same sentence with Raymond Chandler, but if somebody sees that when they read that, I'll take it.
Very complimentary. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll take it. Yeah.
And all the talk about Doc Savage, which I didn't really read any until I was adult later. I didn't discover him as early. But there was also Tom Swift, which is almost the kid version of Doc Savage.
Right. YA Doc Savage. Exactly.
Yes. Doc Jr.
When I first saw the cover of your first book and I saw the goggles, I thought, oh, this is like G8 and his battle aces, because they look like aviator goggles. And of course, when I read it, discovered, no, actually, it's the gimmick, if you will, the instrument that allows him to have enhanced senses and capabilities and so forth. And so it was a pleasant surprise, if you will, because G8 was not one of my favorites in terms of, I don't have a feel for adventures in the air. It helps you get around the planet to be that kind of travel and stuff like that. But so it's a very distinctive look. Is that something that you had from the moment you started the series, or did you try out various different things in your head as to how will I give this guy a leg up? How will I give him special?
I'm glad you asked that question, Alan, because if I can switch over to a slightly different genre, but still very much in the pulp vibe, serials, the cliffhanger serials from the 1940s, 30s and 40s. One of my favorites, if not my favorite, my all-time favorite, was called Spy Smasher. And I've seen it a number of times. And there's something about that look that really appeals to me. It's not quite World War II, post World War I. It's that World War I aviator look, and he's got that motorcycle, and the stunt work is fantastic. And I've watched it a number of times, and I think it's fair to say that was a pretty big influence on the development of the character and the development of the story and the development of the whole sort of tone of the story in the series. So when I went to Tom Gianni, the artist who did the illustration, I sent him some pictures of Kane Richmond, the actor, in that getup, saying, this is what I'm looking for. And he really understood. He really he understood the tone that I was going for. He understood the style, and he just nailed it. Sad end to that story is Tom has since passed away. He was struggling with cancer when he was painting that illustration. And I went to him for the second book a couple years later, and he initially said, yeah, I'll do it. Then he got involved in some cancer treatment that was really knocking him out. And he got back to me. He said, I just don't think I can pull this off. I'm going to hand it off to my friend Doug Klaba, also in Chicago, who did a great job and who is now my go-to for the covers. But Tom really, he is the artist who really helped me bring the character to life in a very visual way. He completely captured the tone and the style I was looking for, that sort of sepia tone to that cover illustration. I dedicated the third book to Tom, and as parting gifts go, it was an incredible gift. And it's just unfortunate. Not only were we collaborators and partners publishing venture, we became friends in the process. And I really miss the fact that I can't work with him again. But yeah, he really helped me bring the character to life in the tone and the style and the vibe. Yeah. And it was very much influenced by Spy Smasher, the serial.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. The color covers are similar enough, and I hadn't really looked at it. One of the things we also talked about was what attracted me to the Doc Savage paperbacks was the James Bama covers. Incredibly photorealistic, very cool. And yours really captured the spirit of the pulps in terms of the figure in the foreground, whatever villainy is going on. Oh no, someone's strapped to an operating table, those kinds of things. And there's almost tropes to that, but if they're done well, it really is. I need to find out what's going on in here. Another reason that I really like that is that there's people that, I don't know, they don't seem to have either their own vision of what they'd like it to look like, or they don't get what the genre is about in some ways, to be able to not pay homage to, not slavishly follow it, but definitely get enough of those elements so that people who are attracted to that are going to go, huh, what's this? I'm curious already, because it looks like a book like this should look.
You hit an interesting point when you say paying homage but not slavishly. I think, and I have to tread lightly here when I say this, I think there are those who want their modern day pulp fiction to read and feel just like the stuff that was being published 80 or 90 years ago. And I think that
criticism is where you're not true enough to it, and it's
right. And I think to adhere that closely to that style is a disservice to the 21st century reader. I think you really want to tell a good story, you have to bring a level of sophistication to the storytelling that may not have been there back in the 20s and 30s. And I don't want to disparage any of those writers. They in their own way, in their own time, they were doing great work. But I think we're at a point in terms of the audience sophistication where I think they want and expect a little bit more in terms of character development, a little bit more in terms of depth. There has to be a reason why the hero does heroic things, as opposed to just, I'm just the hero, that's what I'm supposed to do. I think there has to be some degree of motivation that the reader has to understand. Why does this person do this? What motivates him? What compels him to keep going back into the room where the bullets are flying, as opposed to just, here comes the hero to save the day because this is what he does in every issue, so here he is again. I think readers want more than that. I think writers want to do more than that. I think to tell the same story the same way that people were reading in the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, I think it would make for a very stale experience, I think.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the things we had talked about was a lot of those were done like, what's the cost per word? They were churned out on a weekly or bi-weekly basis.
Oh, that's crazy. Yeah.
Formulaic, but it was also just they had to get it done. When I read your book, it was like, wow, there's a lot going on in here compared to the relatively slender backs and various different things. And instead of it being that it didn't have the spirit of it, it was more, there's a lot more going on here. I love books where it's not just the plot line and enough other things. Certain authors are regularly criticized for their characters cardboard and they too much get to the point. I don't mind a little prose. I don't mind a little backstory and motivation and all that kind of stuff. So I'd say you're like, if we're going to grade on the Rodney Dangerfield system of, oh, that weighs about an A, your book was nice and thick and there was a lot going on. It wasn't filler. It wasn't I love Charles Stross books because it's not only the main plot line of the thing, he has so many other cool ideas going on, each of which could probably be its own book. And I saw that a lot in yours as well, that you had a lot of interesting things. And maybe if you're thinking about, hey, this could be a series, you want to lay those little treasures out there that this could get answered in a successor and stuff like that.
Thank you for saying that, because I took some heat after the first and second books from a couple, one in particular, a couple people, but one in particular who just insisted that the books were too long. I take issue with that. I stand by my story, literally and figuratively. My feeling is if you have a problem with a book that's any more than 200 pages long, maybe the problem is not so much with my book, but the problem is with your attention span.
I say that all the time.
and there are some great writers who can tell a very good story in a very short time, but I don't know that I don't know. I just feel I could go on and on, but I just feel if you have a good story to tell and you need 300 or 400 pages to do it, as long as you're keeping things as tight and streamlined and well paced, then you should have the luxury to do that. If you're just meandering around for 400 or 500 pages and not getting anywhere and not getting anything done, yeah, you need to dial it back. But if you need that space to tell a good, rich, dense story, then you should take that space.
Yeah. Stephen, you've talked about how in some of the authors that you've spoken with your Undiscovered Works in this podcast, you can tell, hey, some people need an editor. They really they have a good story to tell, but they really don't seem to have that filter, that focus. So what do you think about that, Stephen? How
what John said is absolutely true. And the funny thing is, I interview a lot of new authors. Some of these people 3 months ago wrote their first book, and now they're talking to me on the podcast. And it's funny because I can't say I'm anywhere near as experienced as John, but I've gotten enough experience and talked to enough people now that I can start to tell. It's like, yeah, you're really new because you don't understand the story is the story. The story, it needs to be as long as it needs to be. You don't understand that until you've written some and gotten that out of the way as the past ones, because then you can see the difference in your writing coming up. And again, I'm not speaking from decades of experience or anything, but the little bit I've done, I know that now from back a couple years ago, what I was thinking, how I was thinking of it. And that also, I wanted to ask John, so in modern times, why did you choose to write books that were basically pulp fiction books? Because, and we talked about the kids and stuff, there's people that have no idea what we mean when we say pulp fiction other than the movie. So why choose to write that style modernly?
You mean that style or that period or both?
The style, but the period too would be good.
Okay. The style, certainly. Okay. I would say that I tried a few other things in a few other genres. I tried some science fiction. I tried some detective. I couldn't find my way in. Where do I fit in the overall scheme of, if I can use the word loosely, literature? What kind of story do I want to tell? And I tried to tell a science fiction time travel story, and time travel stories just make my head hurt, because it's just every time you tell a time travel story, you always hit the same paradox that you just, the world we live in exists in cause and effect. And when you start tampering with that, I get a migraine. But anyways, so my point is, when I started reading stuff like John Carter or Doc Savage, I thought, okay, this is a way in. This is a doorway. This is a place where I can land as a writer. So if I can get more familiar with this type of popular fiction, maybe this is the kind of story I could tell. So there's that. And there's also the issue of the period, because all the great classic pulp fiction was prevalent in the 20s, 30s, 40s. And that's a real sweet spot in history for me. Not just because, it's glamorous, speaking of the clothes, the style. It's if you think about what was going on from, say, 1929 to 1950, the world was changing dramatically in ways that were just comprehensive. And everything was up for grabs, whether it was the economic depression of the 1930s and then the run up to World War II. No one knew what the future, none of us know what the future looks like, but the world was a very uncertain place. Where's my next meal coming from? Is my brother going to come home from the war? Is my dad going to come home from the war? We haven't heard from him in months because he's on some secret mission, whatever. That's when people have to make really hard decisions, when they're confronted by circumstances like that in times like that. And that's when I think the great stories really emerge, when people are like backed up against the wall by their circumstances, or how do I feed my family? What's going to happen? Are we going to be overrun by Nazis? At what point do they start coming up the Atlantic coast? You know, it's easy for us to say, oh yeah, we won that war. In 1942, 43,
That was
we
not
didn't
a sure
know.
thing.
We
That's
did
right.
not, things were looking pretty rough, and nobody knew what the future looked like. And I think when you're confronted with circumstances like that, that's when the people they take extreme measures, and that's when the really great stories emerge, when people are did with really make or break, do or die circumstances.
Right. When I've had people talk to me about like why this really strikes a chord with me, why I really love them, and they'll often say that's just escapist literature. And there was really tough times to try to escape from, but it was also not at all escapism. It was what you were just saying, confronting, we're really in a tough place. We really don't know where our next meal is coming from. We don't know what's going to happen during the war. We don't know what's happening with this new technology. And that ability to project yourself into those things and say, what would I do in those circumstances? Would I stand up? Would I be a man, be a hero? Or would I kind of like be a bystander? Would I be a spectator in my own life? Am I going to do the right thing if I have some risk, real risk at stake here and stuff? And those are the kinds of things that I get often out of those books, is that it isn't just, I don't like my life, and so I'm trying to go to the past or to another planet or whatever else it might be. It's that there's always things to be found there for, if I project myself into those heroes, I hope that I would be as heroic as they are, and that it kind of, whatever that muscle is of nobility and making hard choices and being proud of who you are, absolutely, those are, you work that muscle. You get where then in the real world, you can actually say, I did indeed not let a bad boss make me do something wrong. I did indeed not abuse someone when they were drunk or anything like that. You know what I mean?
I think a lot of times people are not just readers, but people in general, they're looking for hope. They're looking for something to be hopeful about.
Yes.
And it sounds very lofty and abstract, but I think, it's what are we looking for? Entertainment. We're looking for something to hang on to and be hopeful about. And I'm finding that it's a through line that's running through the Midnight Guardian series. And I'm not sure if that was my intent when I started out, but that's where it's going. I think that very much it was a theme of this third book. It takes place at a time of the year when people are really trying to hold on to hope. And we're at this point, it takes place at the end of 1938. We're at Christmas time. We're still rocked by depression, and we know that something scary is starting to happen on the other side of the ocean
in Europe.
And,
exactly.
And what does it all mean? And suddenly this young kid is kidnapped in my own town. What's going to happen to this kid? Christmas is coming. Is he going to be reunited with his family? What happens when you put different people from different circumstances, different walks of life into a situation and say, okay, we got to find this kid. How do we do this? We have people who are destitute. We have wealthy people. We have Christians. We have Jews. Maybe that's a lot to throw into a pulp fiction story, but I don't know. It's how I roll. I don't know how else to do it. Yes, I want to tell a fun, exciting story, but I can't do it without just bringing something more resonant to it. I just feel like I have to bring some resonance and some depth to it, I think.
I really have enjoyed that. In other words, instead of it just being, a couple battles over fisticuffs and maybe trying to find clues and stuff like that, it's actually nice to see, here's what society was like back then, and they were working out how to work together in those kind of circumstances. It was very easy in 1938 to say, wow, anybody of German ancestry, are we getting worried that they're all saboteurs? And you know what I mean? And whatever aspersions were being cast on the Jewish people by those people, the number of people that were buying into that are they the secret controllers of the bankers and stuff? So to get people to put aside their prejudices, and boy, a lot of what you said earlier of the world has always had elements like this. It's not that we just learned about prejudice. It's not that we just learned about that. There's all through history, and not just going back into the 20s to the 40s, but you named the period of history. There's always been rabble rousers or hate mongers. There's always been diasporas and people coming into new cultures, and how are they going to be accepted or carve their own way into a place in that society and so forth. And that's many of those kinds of things. Like when you're meeting a whole new civilization and you don't know anything about their religion, their technology, you hope that they're not headhunters and human sacrificers and stuff like that. But there's no guarantee about that either. You don't know if you're going to make a gesture or say the wrong word and find out you just insulted the king without meaning to. There were really those interesting things, the clash of cultures and the exploring of the world. maybe we were opening the world up in a way that we had never done before, of just like us being the melting pot and having that there were different, what would you call them, colonies of, hey, here's where the Swedish are, and here's where the South Africans are, and whatever. There's all the different waves of immigration that came into the United States, and each of those was adding to the melting pot. But it wasn't always easy. It was trying to decide, are the Irish really okay? Are the Italians really okay? And fill in whatever minority you want and have us, when will it get to assimilation instead of suspicion?
And it's funny because I try to make Union City sort of a microcosm of America. All the things saying, just, we have a lot of, if you notice, I try to throw as many ethnic names into my stories as possible.
Exactly.
Some are Polish, some are German, some are Italian. And I try to make it a city that's people who generally follow the better angels within themselves. There's a bit of a soliloquy that goes on in the second book, about halfway through. The district attorney, Ed Gallagher, he's talking about, he's referring to this Nazi element that has taken root in the city. And he basically says, I'm paraphrasing here, how the hell did this happen? How did this happen in a city so fair as this, how did this sneak in when we weren't paying attention? Now, all I'm going to say about that is I was writing that book in 2017 or 18. I'm just going to leave it at that.
When we were confronted with that same question, we thought that was a settled issue. And
right.
No.
And so it just, I'm telling these stories in a specific period of history, but stuff sneaks in that even I'm not aware of it's happening until it happens. There are things that I have frequently said, especially with this most recent book, writing any kind of, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, whatever, but writing fiction is a mysterious process. On one hand, you are consciously controlling what's happening, but on the other hand, there are things happening subconsciously that they're on a track of their own that your hands aren't necessarily on the wheel. I made a revelation about a character in the third book that I didn't see coming until the second book. And I realized that this character, there's an aspect to this character's background that I wasn't aware of until the second book was taking shape. And I realized, this guy has a whole backstory that I wasn't aware of, but it's revealing itself to me in the writing of the second book. So I presented that to the reader in the third book. And if you've read it, you probably know what I'm talking about.
I do.
But I really,
your characters are real enough that they're talking to you. They're letting you know what kinds of, that's very cool.
Like I said, it's a mysterious process, but it's fascinating. And I enjoy it when it happens, because it's just, okay, I must be doing something right if these characters are taking on a life of their own and they're steering me a little bit. Hopefully that's a good sign. I'm learning as I go, guys. I really am. And but I'm doing it in front of an audience full of people. And that's a little scary. But I hope to God I'm doing it right, because I wouldn't say I have millions of people watching, maybe a couple hundred if I'm lucky. I don't know. But I'm learning in front of an audience. So I'm just doing the best I can.
Well, your numbers are going to jump after being on our podcast.
Oh, absolutely.
Influencers, tastemakers. Hello.
We'll have to get you a t-shirt. We actually do have t-shirts.
Okay.
But you said something, John, from the author's perspective that I love, that you tried different things and you fell into this. And I think that's a big thing with authors, is discovering exactly what you write well, what stories you write well, because Alan and I talk about plots and stories a lot in all the books we like, and you can do the same type of plot, but with serial fiction or steampunk or science fiction or whatever. And you got to get the stories that are you. And I think that's what you discovered with that. And
it took a while. It did. I dabbled a little bit in detective fiction, like that more. I'm going to go back to that. But I tried science fiction, and it just, I don't know, for whatever reason, it was close to the sort of adventure kind of story I wanted to tell, but it wasn't quite there. So that it's kind of, you're right. I had to feel my way until I found a place where I could land and feel like I had landed safely, and I was moving in the right direction.
One of the things that I've noticed is sometimes people work in multiple genres, and it's a very cool thing to be able to put on a different hat to say, now I'm writing Westerns. I don't know, Robert P. Parker wrote very successful detective fiction, and then did some Westerns and did things from a female detective perspective and from the alcoholic police chief perspective. I always thought it was very interesting that he was able to create enough distinction between them that it wasn't like, we had a couple spare Spencer plots, but he had already saturated the market, and so he went over here. He really seemed to have created not distinct enough things and enduringly created them and fleshed them out enough that now, even with his passage, other people could step in and say, this is in the style of Raymond Chandler. This is in the style of
Right.
Robert B. Parker, whatever else it might
Right.
be.
I've read all 40 Spencer novels. I think it's 40. I've read them all.
Me too.
I have to say he's a huge influence on what I do. There are moments where I write a piece of dialogue and I step back and I look at it and I really like it. And I think I can thank Parker for that, because if you read enough of anybody, they work their way into your DNA. And
Yes.
he was one of those writers. He just really even when he wasn't completely on his game, I'd say maybe the second half or the last third of his career, I think he was not quite on his game the way he was earlier. And there were times when like the stories themselves weren't compelling me a whole lot, but God, the dialogue was so good. And I would read it just for the damn dialogue, because it was just so punchy and snappy and funny that I kept reading until his very last book. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
I mentioned him in specific because to flatter you, it really was. Your dialogue is very well crafted. It really is. Some people, they really only know how to write expositorily. They really don't know how to talk like people really talk with. They don't speak in complete sentences. There's cutting each other off, and you know what I mean? There's all kinds of much more human element to,
Sure.
especially the wisecracking. It really can't be. People don't speak in full jokes. They kind of tease with each other, and especially when someone, to be able to have multiple people in dialogue that you can tell what kind of person they are just from how they do it, what their word choice is, whether there's simmering anger, whether there's carefree. He was really good at that, and I think I see some of that with you too.
Well, thank you.
You don't have to be saying at this point the hero really gets it in the neck. It's much more. There's real dislike between these two, but they're having to deal with a common enemy, so they're going to submerge that. But there's enough still little digging on each other, because they just can't conceal that they just aren't the best of friends.
Right. And I first of all, thank you for the comment. I appreciate that. I have enjoyed the relationship that has developed between Jack Hunter and the police detective Mike Dugan.
Okay.
It seems like for whatever reason, the repartee, the banter between those two gets really lively. And I remember, I'm not a huge fan of Quentin Tarantino, but I remember an interview that I saw with him talking about screenwriting. And he said, it's a different process for different writers. But for me, I put two characters in a room and I just start writing down what they say. And I remember I saw that interview many years ago, and I didn't quite understand what that meant. But then after writing 3 books and several short stories, I get it. It's just, if you understand these characters well enough, you know what they're going to say to each other before you even type the words.
Exactly. John Sanford is great with that as well. The guy who writes the Lucas Davenport books, the Prey books. His characters sound like they should sound like, and they've grown over time. They've gotten a little bit older. They get when they're under pressure, they're different than when they're cool, calm, and collected. He's also a master dialogist, if that's a word.
Yes. I've read I want to say the first like 10 or 12 Lucas Davenport books by John Sanford. What is Lucas has got to be like 80 years old now? Is that?
They operate on comic book time, where they are in suspended animation for the sake of the series.
Right. Yeah.
And actually, he did a good offshoot of those called Virgil Flowers, another character that he's like a hippie cowboy, but he really is smart as hell, and people always underestimate him. And the way that he's also able to have multiple series that embrace different kinds of characters. His latest one is Lucas adopted a daughter, Letty, if I remember correctly, and now she's following in the father's footsteps, but she's of course her own woman. And in this world of still determining whether we think women are actually human, that they actually are smart and tough and stuff like that, they're very good to have him show those things without having to be like a screed about it. You know what I mean?
So if Lucas Davenport has an adult daughter now, it's been a long time since I've read those books.
There you go.
I think there was a little girl involved at some point, but
she is now either just out of college and is now her own. I think she's either doing her own private detective stuff, or she's doing it for friends and then is finding out this. And anyway, I don't mean to distract you someone else's work, but those are good examples of that's the kind of thing that I seek out and that I've seen in yours. So
thank you. Appreciate it. The microphone is on. It's good to know.
There we go. We're going. The show is loaded with pull quotes. Yeah,
exactly. I'm gonna write all these down.
Harkins to Raymond Chandler. Yes.
Wow.
John, let me ask you, one of the things we love to talk about is all the things we do. Alan and I are quite busy usually. And
Yeah.
we compare notes. So what'd you do this weekend? Okay, we got this list. Every year coming up is PulpFest. And I know you
Yes.
and Jim go to that. Tell everybody a little bit about what PulpFest is for anyone interested.
PulpFest is an annual convention. Originally it was in Columbus, but it has since moved to Pittsburgh several years ago. It is a collection. It's a convention of pulp buyers and sellers and dealers of original pulp magazines, and also writers of modern day pulp, like myself and like Jim. You'll find anything from pulp magazines to paperbacks to I think there's some video vendors there. It's just a mixed bag of people who just really love that whole genre of fiction, from, I'm going to say, anywhere from the early 1900s all the way up to maybe the 1950s or 60s. And then you'll have, like I say, you'll have the more modern day writers like myself, but they're very much dialed into that pulp aesthetic.
Yeah.
And when I say pulp aesthetic, because there are plenty of characters who aren't really technically from the pulp genre. There's the Green Hornet came out of radio. The Lone Ranger came out of radio and television. But I think it's safe to call them pulp figures as well, if you use the general term pulp in terms of a pulp aesthetic as opposed to pulp with a capital P. So yeah, it's a fun experience. I've gone almost every year since 2009. There was, let's see, they did not have a convention in 2020 because of COVID. The following year, 21, I did not go because I had a family conflict. My daughter was moving into her dormitory at Ohio State that same weekend. But other than that, I've been to every show. First as an attendee, and more in the last 8 years, I've gone as a vendor. But yeah, it's a fun time. I recommend it to anyone who's even remotely interested in pulp fiction. That is one of two shows that you really want to be at in the course of the year.
And it's not just the vendors. They have all sorts of celebrations of different authors, and they have talks and
yes.
Shows,
you're right. There's the whole programming aspect as well. You've got great presentations about artists, about writers, about periods, about certain publishers who specialize in certain kinds of genres. They have in the past had guests of honor, but they haven't had really good luck with that in the last couple of years. People backing out. A lot of the guests of honors are getting up there in years, and sometimes they commit to coming, but then they can't because of an illness or something. I think they've sort of, for the time being, they've done away with the whole guest of honor concept. But yeah, there's a lot of great presentations in the late afternoon and evenings. They just, in addition to the dealer room where we actually go and buy cool stuff. Yeah,
exactly. One of the things I love about going to those conventions is none of us are getting younger. And just like they had a big project like from the Smithsonian or something like that, where they were determined to talk to as many makers of Appalachian music as they were dying. They were leaving us. They don't capture so much that is oral history and especially oral performance. We're going to lose it. And that's one of the joys of going to pulp conventions, comic book, science fiction conventions, that you really get to meet the Ray Bradburys of the world before we lose them. We've already, any number of pulp people are already gone, but there's, like you said, maybe it's unfortunate that the guest of honor really would like to meet, I don't know, Hugo Greensback. Is he still around? No, I don't think so. There's all kinds of fantasy figures that I would just love to have one more conversation with. So at least there is this wonderful venue. I'm not sure who the organizers are, but labor of love to say, all the people who are into this, we're going to have a way that we're all going to gather for 3-4 days, and we'll just revel in the fact that this is still going strong, that we get to meet each other. And I love that those things are still going on, even if it really is, 80 years at least since it was lively. But that's the whole point, is that some of those things change people's lives. They really want to continue to have a chance to talk about them, to celebrate them and meet the people who did them, and kind of show off, I got every one of the omnibuses or whatever else it might be.
I think the writers from the heyday of pulp fiction, I think they're all gone at this point. There's a guy who has been, he's written a lot of like adult westerns. His name is Robert Randisi. He's still alive. He's in his early 70s, I think. And the plan was for him to be the guest of honor at last year's show. And the plan was for me to interview him on stage, just do an evening guest of honor presentation. I would sit down with him and do Q&A. The plan fell through. He couldn't make it, so he opted not to come, and so that never happened. But he has been called the last of the great pulp writers, and he's in his 70s at this point. I think we're running out of pulp writers from the original era, whatever the original era is, anywhere from, I guess, 1940 to 1970. I don't know. There aren't many left, and the ones who are may not be able to make it to events like that. But yeah, to your point, it's a great opportunity to dial into when and where you can, just to dial into that those folks who really like lay the groundwork for the stuff that we read today.
Yeah. So one of the things I always hope in this era of there's way too much television to watch, books to read, movies to watch, but that also means that every single genre can get its time in the sun. I just finished watching The Night Agent, and it was like a serialized, maybe 10 or 12 episodes, very much the government intrigue. You don't know who to trust, kind of like Jean Le Carre. There's any number of people that are really good at those kinds of things. And the fact that we have Indiana Jones 5 is about to come out. And every time that one of those comes out, I really think this could be the time when they really do say, there's more in this. We could kind of bring the buckets up of cool things that have this same, we're going to go treasure hunting archaeologically, we're going to fight the Nazis, or whatever else it might be. So anything that might work that way for you? Do you have the movie options people coming to visit you occasionally and saying, you've got a fully blown character you could do? You know what I mean? I would love for that thunderbolt to happen for you. I want you to be shamed by how much money they shower on you. I want you to back the money up.
Alan, if that call comes in, I will take it in a heartbeat, but I don't think that's coming anytime soon. Yeah, I mean, trust me, I have a whole lineup of actors I would like to see in my Midnight Guardian.
Dreamcasting. That's a constant discussion on all the boards. Dreamcast, exactly.
I said that because I wanted you to ask that question, Stephen. I think I like Chris Pine.
Okay.
Yeah.
As Hunter.
After he shaves that beard back off. Just the beard's got to come off. And I like Emma Stone as Betty Carlisle.
Okay.
Yeah.
I cannot figure out who's going to play Buzz, because Buzz is a very special character. Buzz is a character I hear about a lot. A lot of people say, I really like Buzz. He's like the conscience. He's not just Jack's conscience. He's like the conscience of the city. He's that sort of like boyish, good-hearted, innocent, but crazy smart guy who pretty much knows how to build and fix anything. He's inspired by a couple characters I've seen in film and read in books, but I can't figure out who would play him, in what modern day actor would play Buzz. I'd like Kevin Costner for Ed Gallagher, the district attorney.
District attorney.
I'd like Paul Rudd as Bart Maxwell, the reporter, the columnist.
Okay.
I think from the first book, Nicky Diamond or Nicky Dynamite would be, let's see. Well, Paul Muni is dead, but that's who I picture for that character.
The tough, kind of crazy, don't know what he's
little crazy, yeah.
Exactly that.
Yeah,
so
kind of like,
Eric Roberts, Willem Dafoe. I'm trying to think of.
Okay, yeah, sure,
okay,
sure.
There's something in the eyes. Michael Keaton playing a villain. You know what I mean? It was respectable, but then he goes in.
I want the actor who you put him in front of a camera and you don't know what's going to happen. Like
exactly.
Even when you're the director, you don't know what's going to happen. That's who I want for Nicky Diamond.
Nicholson 40 years ago.
Sure.
Yeah.
Or maybe Vincent D'Onofrio 70 pounds ago. Just
okay.
You know,
because he's got the Kingpin thing conquered now.
Well,
but
sure,
there was a time when he was leaner, like you're saying. Exactly. Okay.
Right. But I love D'Onofrio because, like I say, you put him in front of the camera, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what's going to happen. Yeah. And so, and then I've even picked out like actors from the 1930s from that period in history who would be good at
it. They can do that now with all the deep fake stuff.
See exactly where.
Sure. Jackie. Oh my God. Lou Gehrig. Why am I the actor?
James Stewart.
No, Pride of the Jesus. I can't believe I'm.
Yeah, Pride of the Yankees.
Pride of the Yankees played Lou Gehrig. He played. Oh my God! I can't believe.
Really?
He's like one of the most iconic actors in the history of Hollywood. Gary Cooper. Jesus. Gary Cooper. Yes.
That's why.
Right. I wanted to say Jackie Cooper, but that's just a different guy. Yeah. Yeah. So, anyways, I like him as a 1930s version of Jack Hunter.
There we go.
But
see, that's when the casting people come to you, you'll be able to say, "Here's the kind of person that I had in mind while I was writing it," or that it occurred to me that while I was writing it, they started to inhabit those icons. You know what I mean? There are modern equivalents of, I don't know, going back to the 30s, who looks like Peter Lorre, who looks like, acts like Sidney Greenstreet, and the whole Sam Spade that is Humphrey Bogart. Sure. You know what I mean? That inhabited that. There's things that. Do we have modern equivalents of some of those? I think so. Who's the hard-boiled detective? Who's the wisecracking brilliant guy. Is that so? Simon, who did, let's see, who's Scotty in the latest Star Trek movies?
Simon Pegg.
Simon Pegg.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
not, see, he's already, it's funny, some people age out of the program. While they were trying to get One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest made, Kirk Douglas couldn't play Randall P. McMurphy anymore, even though he owned the rights to it for a long time. So anyway,
Right.
I'm just.
But yeah, no, there's
that'd be very
there's a whole
interesting.
generation of younger actors that I'm just not familiar with. There are probably some great, there are some great actors who would play the parts that I can't come up with, but
Yeah.
but they're like something like between say 25 and 35, and I'm just not dialed into that
Right.
generation of actors. Yeah, I don't know,
Exactly.
but
Who's got a little wear on him? Who's got the perfect chin?
exactly, yeah.
And
Yeah.
with all the streaming and all the content being made nowadays, you got a good chance. I could see a station, Tubi is doing serial shows now, and they're
Yeah.
free TV. But what's his name that did Wool back in the day? His shows now getting, or his books getting made into a show. So
Yeah.
I would love to see a good pulp fiction-ish noir feel show. We don't really have that now.
Again, if the call
Yeah.
comes in, I'll take it in a minute.
Exactly.
I'm happy to talk to anybody who wants to talk to me. But yes, I'm not holding my breath, but yeah.
Right.
So, this, please, Stephen, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Alan, go.
It's going to be the stereotype for a moment. Everybody always says, hey, where do you get your ideas? Steve and I often talk about, wow, I have so many ideas that it's more a matter of choosing amongst and quieting the chorus of all the things it could be. How do you work? Do you have already ideas for a fourth and fifth and sixth book? Or are you waiting for inspiration because there is something in the modern world that you'd like to be able to? One of the joys of past fiction or science fiction is you can really comment on what's going on now, but if it's the Borg doing it, then you're not getting in trouble for being too
Right.
sharply focused on something like that. Do you have certain subjects you'd like to visit, or do you have certain locales, certain menaces next for your main character that you want him to go through this kind of trial by fire? Or
There's a couple different ways to answer that question. There are plans in the works for Jack Hunter, Midnight Guardian, where it should be fairly clear by now to anyone who's read all three books that we're careening towards World War II. And here's this guy in this city, this sort of cosmopolitan is a word that you can use in the context of the 1930s. Here's this guy who with these abilities, these enhanced abilities that are almost like a secret weapon. And the question becomes, at what point do people in positions of power and authority recognize this guy could be an asset? And that's all I'm going to say. But we're heading in a direction where we're heading towards international conflict. And here's somebody who can do things that most people can't.
Okay.
And at what point does that become a secret weapon of some kind?
Is it going to be by request, or is it going to be dragooned into doing it? Because
That's a very good question. And I have an answer to that, but I'm not going to tell you.
okay.
Then another way to answer that question, Alan, is there are other periods of history that I would like to explore. And there's the whole Cold War thing. And all I'm going to say about that is I have already introduced a character who you will likely see again in a different series taking place in a slightly different period of history.
Interesting.
And
the making of the generational saga. Okay.
Yeah. So there's that. My problem is that I'm interested in too many things. Yeah. Recently, I've developed this fascinating. I've always enjoyed delving into the various aspects of the history of World War II, the causes, the various battles, the various campaigns, the individuals involved in shaping the war and how it turned out, the technology that was developed to take us from 1940 to 1945. Lately, I've developed a real fascination with the French Resistance in the early part of the war. There have got to be a million stories in that whole aspect of
Vichy Underground and
exactly. Okay. I mean, I feel like you could build an entire series around that. I probably shouldn't say too much so that no one steals any of my ideas, but
okay.
And in the last couple months, I've been working on a couple of short stories, Westerns actually. One is for a Flinch book, that's a Flinch anthology that's coming out in mid-year. And another one is for an anthology being published by Stormgate Press. I'm not sure if them or not. So I'm kind of immersed in like the whole Western genre right now. I'm like eating, sleeping, and breathing. I'm reading a lot of Westerns to immerse myself in the genre. I'm finishing up 2 stories I'm looking forward to getting those behind me so I can get back to reading and doing and writing some other things. But I don't know that I ever would pursue writing Western novels on a regular basis, although I wouldn't rule it out. It's a genre that's very foreign to me. There's something in there about scale, the sheer physical size of the unexplored Western United States that just I can't get my head around. It's if you tell an urban noir story, your stage is maybe a couple blocks of an urban city, and no one can see much farther than the wall of that office building that's maybe 100 yards away. But
Right.
when you're out there on the plains, you look out and you can see that Indian scout sitting on a horse on the top of the ridge, literally a mile away. I grew up in the suburbs of Cleveland. I can't imagine being able to look out that far and see a rider on a horse. It's a sense of scale that I really struggle with. It just, you look out and all you can see is open land and mountains and sky.
That's a very cool observation. I have been,
yeah.
We've been all over the United States traveling, and that's one of the things. Once you get out, the mountains are bigger, the valleys are bigger. You really can we're at the top of one mountain and you look down the valley to the other one. It looks like, oh, we're going to be at the mountains soon. And then you drive a whole day and you're not to that next set of mountains. You know what I mean?
Right. For a writer who's not familiar with that kind of landscape, because he's never lived in a landscape like that, I think that's a big leap to try and write stories that take place on a stage that is that large and that wide open and that sparsely populated. It's just like the whole style of storytelling, I think, becomes different because your sense of space is different. And that's not to say I never would do it or never would want to do it, but it would be a big shift in gears to try to write stories in that kind of a setting on a regular basis.
There are others, as we've talked about, Steve and I, about Louis L'Amour wrote any number of great Westerns, and Elmore Leonard actually started off doing Westerns and turned more to a hard-boiled detective. And so there are people that do multiple things, but there almost certainly is a change in mindset where it really matters that where your next watering hole is as compared to I walked into the other room and turned on the, you know what I mean?
I drove to the gas station, or I went into the diner to get a cup of coffee. It's a whole different, and that diner is a block away. Maybe you're walking like 150 yards, whereas like you say, or you're riding a horse for 4 days to get to the next mountain range. It's just a whole different experience.
Sense of scale. That's very cool. Okay.
Yeah. I'm not sure I have it in me to do that. I'm open to trying, but I don't know. It'd be a challenge to do it on a regular basis. Yeah.
So do you have a writing environment? Is there a certain room where you have certain music? Like, how do you have a dog? Do you have a family? How do you need focus? Do you like having a little bit of distraction? Steve has talked about this a little bit, that Stephen has how he works best. And I have never taken on any big works, but I'm often at the computer and I'm writing my little essays. But I don't need to isolate myself necessarily to do that. I do it more with coding because I'm a computer guy. So back to you. Do you have a happy place, time, etc.? Do you outlast everybody and do it at 2 a.m? What do you do?
It's funny because I will tell you right now that this laptop and the camera that is embedded in this laptop is carefully positioned so that you don't see the freaking mess that is in this office.
The chaos. Okay.
Yes. Turn this maybe like an inch and a half and you'd see a very different picture. But
the reason I use backdrops is so that you can't see. Oh Lord, I'm up in Skynet here in the attic, and he's a lot of stuff. This guy, he's a collector. You could tell. Okay.
I've got a lot. I see.
Uh-oh. We're frozen a little bit. Here's hoping it's just a matter of lag as compared to we've lost him. Oh no, John, if you can still hear us, you're frozen on our we dropped. Okay.
We'll just hang here because maybe he just
he's coming back. All right.
Yeah. There we go.
I got timed out. I'm not sure what happened there, but sorry guys. It just told me you have timed out. What do we have? We're like
I guess we're at an hour Zoom wise or something. Yeah, I didn't. Okay.
Anyway, I'm sorry. So yes, I have certainly a lot of books in here and a lot of clutter. It's not the ideal, but it is my space. We live in a modest post World War II bungalow. It's pretty much myself and my wife now because our kids are in college and they're home for part of the year. So there's more room and there's more time than there was before. So that's good. But it's also a matter of getting my head in the right space internally as opposed to what's going on around me. I have to get focused and I have to I have a day job. I work at home, which is a whole story unto itself. I work for a company, but I work at home. Thank you,
Right.
COVID. So the 8 hours of my day is still focused on that. My
You
wife
have to
is
handle
very
the
good about
transition. Yeah.
beg pardon?
You have to handle the transition between their time and your time, because my wife has
Yes.
a lot of problems with that. She also works at home, and she is regularly given more to do than she should have. But then how
Yes.
much of your life do you keep giving over instead of grabbing some back for yourself?
Yeah, and you have to, when you work at home, you just have to you have to say, okay, it's time to stop doing this job and go back to my life outside of work. And then you have to negotiate, what does that look like? I want to make sure I'm spending time with my wife. Yes, we have a dog, to your question. He requires a certain amount of attention, but my wife is very good about giving me time and space to do this. She's always been extremely supportive, so that's good. So I would say I have more time now to write than I did, say, a few years ago when my kids were in grade school and high school, when they needed more of my time and my attention. I wish I had the wherewithal to clean up this space and make it feel more inviting and conducive to being creative. But this room has become like the storage area for stuff that I don't want to think about right now. So I'll just put it in there. But I cleared off this desk for the sake of this conversation so we could do it here. So it was a good first
We
step.
appreciate you not peering out from between stacks and stuff like that.
No, it wouldn't take much, let me tell you. Yes. Yeah. So hopefully that answers your question. I don't know.
So, John, we've mentioned Jim a couple times, and you mentioned Flinch. Tell everybody what Flinch Books is and what you guys do.
Flinch Books is, we've been publishing now for, let's see, we are in our 8th year, I think, or it was, no, it was 8 years in January. So I guess technically we are starting our 9th year. We emphasize quality over quantity. We don't publish a lot of titles in a given year. We average about 2, maybe 3 some years. We're just a 2-person operation. It's the 2 of us, and we have a very excellent graphic designer who helps us with our covers and our internal page formatting. She's fantastic, but it's just the 2 of us. And we publish books, mostly anthologies, but also long fiction novels, in the spirit of, and that's an important phrase, in the spirit of pulp fiction, classic pulp fiction of the 20s, 30s, 40s. And I say in the spirit of, because to get back to a point we were talking about earlier, we certainly want to latch onto that aesthetic, but we also want to do it in a way that's a little bit more progressive, a little bit more interesting, a little bit more, put our own spin on it, but very much with a nod to that period. We've done everything from science fiction to adventure to detective. Jim has his occult fiction, his occult detective series called Sergeant Janus. There's 3 books in that series. I think he may be working on a 4th eventually. I'm not sure what the plan is there. As I say, we're working on a Western anthology right now. We've done sword and sorcery. We're open to anything that's going to work. We're open to anything that's going to just tap into an audience, but yet give them something that's maybe a little bit different from what they might be getting from other small press publishers like us. The phrase new pulp gets thrown around a lot. I'm not fond of it for a lot of reasons, but I just like to think of what we do as being in the spirit of pulp fiction from back in the day.
But not straitjacketed by it, if you will. Okay. Yeah.
Correct. Yes.
I'll tell you, I am much a fan of your stuff. I haven't explored the anthologies. I haven't explored the Detective Janus series. My wife will be happy to hear, Pookie, I need to go buy some more books.
PulpFest is coming.
But really,
we are working on a website, hopefully. I don't know when it's going to happen because it's a costly endeavor, but we need to have a centralized place on the internet where people can go and just see all of our books. We'll be up to 14 by the end of this year. Again, not as many as some publishers who are cranking them out like 8 or 10 titles in the course of a year, but I'd like to think that we deliver a level of quality that you might not see elsewhere.
Nice. You got anything else, Alan?
We've done the Or Plus. That's what we were hoping for.
Yeah.
Can't thank you enough, John, for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate
it. Getting insight into who you are, what you do, why we are fascinated with these kinds of things, and just it really so much appreciated. You know what I mean? The point of Relentless Geekery is because it's got a many faceted diamond, and this is one of those things that it's not only a joy to read the works, but to meet a little bit the people behind them, and then find out that they're actually pretty cool too. You know what I mean? There's all manner of creators that are, you name it, a little prickly or a little, I don't know, full of themselves. And you are wonderfully down to earth and wonderfully aware of why you love it and why you love sharing these kinds of things. And so it builds my enthusiasm, as opposed to, can't separate the art from the artist, where you're going to have to, because this guy's kind of a jerk and you're not a jerk. You know what I mean?
Thank you. I'm just a guy trying to tell good stories, and I'm happy to talk to anybody about the process, about the end product. You guys have both individually and together have been very supportive, and it's very much appreciated. I think people don't realize that a lot of times a writer needs to hear, again, is the mic even on? Are people even listening? Are people reading to this? Are they reading this stuff? Are they aware of what I'm doing? Am I just doing this in isolation? Is anybody out there? I have often said, I write my books, I publish my books, I send them out into the world. They're like a message in a bottle, and I put them out there and just wait to see what comes back. And when I have opportunities to have conversations like this one, it's encouraging to know that there are people out there who are not only reading this stuff, but actually kind of like enjoying it, and they're waiting for more. That's good to know. So
exactly.
Thank you.
Bated breath. There we go.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks very much. Thanks Stephen.
John. Appreciate it.
Perfect.
Thanks, guys.
All right.
Appreciate it.
See you
All right,
again,
take care.
maybe at PulpFest. I'm going to try and go.
We will be there. We'll be there. Yes,
It
absolutely.
when's the next one? August, maybe?
August, I think it's, oh shoot, I think it's like 4, 5, 6, 7. Or
Yeah,
it's
that sounds about right.
first weekend in August. 3, 4, 5,
Okay.
6.
Yeah, I
It's
think that's
Thursday
right.
through Sunday. So it's whatever that first Thursday through Sunday is. It's
That we were sharing birthdays. Mine is right around there, so maybe that'll be my treat for myself. Is that I go wallow in pulps, Kalinka, and explore Pittsburgh, and et cetera, et cetera. So
You got me John's trilogy. I'll have to get Jim's Sergeant Janus, because you said you don't have them. I've read the first one.
If you're saying that, I might
They're
need a
very
birthday
good books.
gift. Okay.
very
Yeah,
good books.
they
Very
are
good
good.
occult detective
Wonderful.
stories. They're
It's like
fantastic.
Carnacki, if you ever read Carnacki. Some more pulpish type fiction time.
Exactly. Is that Simon Green? I love his stuff. The Carnegie Institute, that kind of stuff. Okay. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, it's right in that right in that wheelhouse. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect.
Yep.
Cool.
All
All
right.
right, gentlemen. Thank you.
Very
Have a
much.
good evening.
Good evening, everybody.
Thanks.
Take care.
Thanks,
Okay.
guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
You have been listening to the Relentless Geekery podcast. Come back next week and join Alan and Steven's conversation on geek topics of the week.